Hello, class. How are you guys doing? Let me, this chapter 24, it is, I have to increase the volume here just a minute. Okay, so great. Now we can do this. Chapter 24, it has a lot of some of the ecology study of interaction of the ecosystems. That's what ecology means. And then it also has let me I think you're okay now. Okay, great. So oh no, you're not okay. I have to maximize this. Okay, great. I think we are okay now. Okay. Okay, so without any further ado, let's go and talk about the ecosystems. The biosphere is pretty much Earth. Whenever you hear the term biosphere in your life, you're talking about the Earth. Okay, so the portion, he gave you a very poor definition of the biosphere, the portion of the Earth that contains living organisms. All of, well, most all of the Earth, except there's non-living organisms in North Pole, South Pole, and somewhere in deep seas. Even in deep seas, they are finding life nowadays. And even North Pole, South Pole, they are finding life. So pretty much biosphere means Earth, the entire Earth. So it's just talking about the parts of the Earth that has life. Well, everywhere has life, bacteria life, anyhow. And then narrowing it down to ecosystem is a specific area, like ecosystem of the San Joaquin Valley. That's an ecosystem, okay? Ecosystem of the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. So that's an ecosystem. So ecosystem is a specific area of the biosphere of the Mother Earth, where organisms interact with each other and with physical and chemical environment. So that's a key thing. In your multiple choice, you will see it. So when we are interacting with physical and chemical environment, the living organisms are interacting with chemical and physical environment, then that would be ecosystem. Biomes, it means types of terrestrial ecosystem. So the climates conditions define the biomes. That is the tropical rainforest, savanna, temperate grasslands, deserts, the taiga, and tundra. So all of these, I'm not going to go into each one of them. What is a tundra? What is taiga? And of course, you know what is deserts, you know what is deserts and grasslands and temperature grasslands and savanna. I'm not going to go into each one of them, what they are. Aquatic ecosystems are divided into freshwater and saltwater. The freshwater, we have a term for freshwater. The ecology of the freshwater is called limnology, study of the freshwater ecosystem, the environment, physical and chemical environment with the living organisms in there. So the freshwater one is divided into like lakes, rivers, streams, and so on and so forth. Here are the biomes, distribution of the biomes on planet Earth, which I'm not gonna go over it, and I don't think you should worry about it. You learn it probably in your geography class or your geology class or other classes, but I'm gonna let it go from this class. So two types of freshwater ecosystems: standing water, that is lakes and ponds, and running water, rivers and streams. The richest marine ecosystem is near the coasts. Okay, so that's a good piece of information as far as the living organism goes. What he means by richest, as far as the living organism goes, that's near the coasts. Coral reefs, it means they are coral reefs are organisms that they died and they left behind these calcium carbonate deposits, like the corals, which the sea anemones, a type of sea anemones made them. So located offshore, they are deep in the sea, you can find them. And salt marshes occur where rivers, salt marshes are where rivers meets the sea. That's where the rivers come into the sea. That area, if this is sea, this is a river. Okay, so that area where the river meets the sea, right there is called salt marsh. Here are different rivers and marine life and lakes and salt marsh and so on and so forth. You will see that. The ecosystem contains both biotic, living organisms, and abiotic. A in front of a word on your prefix suffixes, it means without. Non-living components. Example of abiotic are soil, water, and weather. And biotic components are categorized as obtain their food, like autotroph and heterotroph. Autotroph are organisms that they make their own food, and heterotroph are organisms like us, we eat the autotrophs. That's what heterotroph and autotroph means. Autotroph use inorganic, like soil. Soil has inorganic compounds. Use inorganic nutrients and an outside source of energy to produce organic nutrients. Therefore, they are called producers. So the same term, autotrophs and producers, same thing. They produce food, and that is algae carry photosynthesis in freshwater and marine habitats, and that is green plants, dominant photosynthesis on land. Here they are. This is an example of an algae, green plants, and autotrophs, rabbit and caterpillar. They both are autotrophs. They eat these guys. Heterotrophs or consumers, that's us, consume foods. There are three different categories of them. Herbivores, as you heard, animals that graze, eat plants and algae only. Carnivores are animals that eat the herbivores, okay? Wolf, tiger, lion. And omnivores, like us, human and pig, is an example of omnivore. They eat everything. They eat both plants and animals. I was reading an article somewhere that animals feed them anything you feed them, like cows. When I was at school, we fed them some kind of pellets, and those pellets had animal parts in them, and they eat them. I mean, you feed them anything, you combine them with other things, they eat them. But this is category, I'm going to have tangent a little bit, sorry about that. But this is based on the type of digestive system animals have, okay, on the teeth and the enzymes and the gut and so on and so forth. They're categorized as autotrophs, omnivores. Okay, here there are examples of them. Okay, heterotrophs continue. There are several levels of consumers in ecosystem. The levels of consumers as in food chain, that is primary consumers, plants. Okay, make sure you know these things. I ask a few questions. Primary consumers are plants, plant-eating insects, and so on and so forth. Secondary consumers, that is insects eating frogs, okay? And tertiary consumers, that is frogs eating hawks. So there are different levels of heterotrophs. So we'll talk about food pyramid here in a minute. Heterotrophs concluded Detritus is feeders feed on Detritus, decomposing particles of organic matters like some bacteria, mushrooms. They break down dead trees. If you've seen logos, dead trees, mushroom bacteria break them down. So that's called Detritus feeders. Earthworms, that is earthworms, beetles, termites, ants, and terrestrial Detritus feeders. That is bacteria also, fungi, bacteria are decomposers which release inorganic substances back into the earth. A niche is like your job. I find teaching as my job is my niche. That's something I fit, I excel in it, and I like it, and so on and so forth. So a niche is the rule of an organism in an ecosystem. What is the rule of bacteria in soil? What is the rule of mushroom in soil? What is the rule of the hawk? So that's the niche, the environment they are living in, and the interaction with the ecosystem. Are they carnivores? Are they omnivores? Are they, and then the rules and the functions, they keep the population of mice low, the eagles, let's imagine, they keep the population of the mice low. That is their niche, that's the rule, their functions in that ecosystem. Okay, I hope that is being producers or a carnivore. And then energy flow and chemical cycling, two phenomena characterize every ecosystem: energy flow and nutrient cycling. So the energy flow begins when producers absorb solar light, so photosynthesis, and nutrient cycling, producers take in or inorganic from soil, from the environment. Then they take organic nutrient and they can be used them in other ecosystems. Right here, these are the plants which they take solar system, the heat from energy, and of course they give off some heat, a little bit of heat as well. And then they are heterotrophs, and what happens, they are autotrophs, I'm sorry, they are autotrophs right here. And what happens, animals like a rabbit eats these producers, and then what happens, the fox or wolf eat rabbits, and then of course they give off some heat, and then in their feces, these animals and the leftover from these animals, they are organic decomposing, and then these will decompose these animals if they're dead or their feces, and then they return it into the soil as inorganic molecules. Okay, so bacteria and fungi return these organic organisms or their feces into the environment as inorganic. These are organic. These are organic, and then they take the sunlight and they take the inorganic compounds, the trees and the autotrophs, they take them and make organic food. Organic food turns into, the animals eat them, they're still organic, and then what happens, the decomposers will break down those organic molecules into inorganic molecules. Energy flow and chemical cycling, only some of the nutrients made by autotrophs is passed on to heterotrophs. Plants use some of the fuels for their cellular respiration. Similarly, only a small percentage of the nutrient taken up by the heterotrophs is available to a higher level of consumers. That's about 10%, which I will talk about that here in a minute. Also, some of the food eaten by herbivores is never digested and is eliminated as feces. Okay, so energy flow and chemical cycling, only part of organic nutrients made by the autotroph is passed on. Heterotroph continues. So metabolic wastes, we talked about that, urine and so on and so forth. Much is used for metabolism and becomes heat. We talked about it in last overhead, last slides, a couple of slides ago. And the remaining food is converted to energy and body weights and making offsprings, and about 55% of the original energy absorbed by plants is available to an ecosystem. Right here is breaking it down for you that this is an autotroph right here, this is heterotroph right here, and what happens to the energy that this giraffe is consuming, right? What happens to that energy? Then cellular respiration, of course, giraffe is a warm-blooded animal. Growth and reproduction, eventually they die, they retain that energy. Excretion, and then like ammonia, the urea, we talked about that, and defecation. So these are all of the energy that we consumers take from autotrophs, and they, of course, eventually give it back to the environment. So based on the law of thermodynamic, energy is never created nor destroyed. Okay, so the energy comes from the environment, gets to us, it's all returned into the environment. So more energy flow and chemical cycling, substances are not lost to any ecosystem during elimination of waste and death. That's how I talked about law of thermodynamics. first law of thermodynamics. Decomposers convert organic nutrients back into the inorganic chemicals that are then released to the soil or atmosphere. Chemicals complete their cycle in an ecosystem when producers absorbs them from atmosphere source. Okay, check your learning outcomes. Energy flow, we have food web. It's like a web, and you will see that the pyramids and diagrams that describes trophic or feeding, and that's the term I would like you to know. Trophic, it means feeding, relationships, grazing food, web, so being with an oak tree and what happens during that oak tree, caterpillars use the leaves, mice, rabbits, and deer eat leaves and grass at the near the ground. Birds, chipmunks, and mice feed on seeds and nuts, and then these herbivores and omnivores are then food for a number of different carnivores. Right here is a food web. Okay, so these are on the top of the food chain, if you would, and they can consume a variety of herbivores. They are, of course, carnivores. And then, so look at this and enjoy it. This is an example of a food web. So food web continue, detrital food web begins with wastes and dead organisms. Detritus is food for decomposers and soil organisms. I think we talked about that, earthworm, and so on and so forth. I'll let you guys read it. So food chain. Okay, food chain is different than food web. Food chain, this would be an example of a food chain. Leaves, caterpillar eat leaves, then mice eat caterpillar, and then hawks eat mice. That's a food chain, okay? But when the same thing happens, for example, is rabbit, okay? So rabbit eats caterpillar and caterpillar eats leaves, and the hawk eats rabbit, then that's a food web now. Of course, you can branch it off a little bit more, and what else can eat caterpillar, and then so on and so forth. So you saw it in the last overhead. That is that detrital food web. We might find this in detrital food chains. Detritus earthworm, which eat the decomposing organic matter right here. And earthworms eat that, and beetles eat earthworms, and shrew eats beetles. Trophic, it means feeding. Trophic levels composed of the organisms that feed on particular link in a food chain. And here they are, the producers on the bottom, and the next level are the consumers, and the second level, the third level, terrestrial, and so on. Okay, you'll see a picture, and I will talk about this during a picture diagram. But this is very important. 10%. In this class, there are not much numbers or calculations you should do, but this is definitely something you should know. 10% of the energy. When you go from with this level of food pyramid to the next level, you lose about only 10% is transferred from this level to that level, to the next level. Okay, so 10% of the energy of one trophic level is available to the next trophic level. So 10% of the leaves are available to caterpillars. 10% of the caterpillars are available to the shrew. I don't know why I can't remember from last example. So this is a herbivore's population consumes 100 kilogram of plants materials. Only 100 kilogram is converted to herbivores tissues. 10 kilogram first level of carnivores, and 1 kilogram second level of carnivores. That's right. The general 10% rule explains why a few carnivores can be supported in a food web. That's why we have a few carnivores. We do not have that many around. Okay, ecological pyramid, that's the next one. the flow of energy with large losses between successive trophic levels. Here we go. So here are the producers. Okay, here are the first layer of the consumers, first consumers, second consumers, and the third consumers. And from each level, it goes to the next level, only 10% is available. Okay, that's why you have on top of food chain, you have a few of them. You don't have that much. Okay. Biomass is the number of organisms multiplied by the weight of the organic matters contained in one organism. So just the definition, I'm not worried about too much of calculations in there. You have to worry about, one would expect biomass of producers to be greater than of the herbivores, and that of the herbivores to be greater than of the carnivores. Yes, that's true. So we talked about it. The aquatic ecosystem, the herbivores may have a greater biomass than the producers. That is true. Okay, because the producers, the algae, they're not that much in the aquatic system, because algae are not are the only producers. They're not that much there. Okay. So global biogeochemical cycles. So your textbook went into these cycles a little bit, and then they are important, yes. But the most important ones is a water cycle, and then the carbon cycle is the second most, I think, second most important one, and oxygen and nitrogen. Then he went to phosphorus, and he went to a few other ones, which is okay, that is fine. But there's so many cycles. But the most important one is the water. Make sure you know everything about the water cycle that is in PowerPoints, and then also the oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, very, very important. Have biotic and non-living abiotic components, can be gaseous or sedimentary. Gaseous cycles, the elements turns into withdrawn from atmospheric gases, carbon and nitrogen cycles. Okay, reservoir, the term reservoir is important. Chemicals unavailable to producers, like this calcium carbonate shells and ocean bottoms, as I talked about it in the ocean bottoms, the calcium carbonate from I talked about that earlier. The sea anemones make the corals. Here we go. That's a calcium carbonate deposits. So source of chemicals unavailable to producers. You will see some examples here. So chemicals move along food chain is biotic community, exchange pools, source from which organisms can take chemicals, that is atmospheres or soils. And right here, they are talking about the cycle of the nutrients between biotic communities and biogeochemical reservoirs. So this is a reservoir for you, this is a reservoir for you, and then the fossil fuels and all of those can be as a reservoir for, it depends what we're talking about. So the water cycle, as I said, the most important one, I'm going to elaborate on it a little bit, and then we go to carbon, I will elaborate on it, and then I'm not going to spend too much time on the rest. Briefly, I'll talk about them, and then we move on. So in the water cycle, there are three things very important that you should know. Evaporation, when sun hits the ocean, the water evaporates, you already know that. Transpiration is evaporation of water from plants. So plants also give off some water into the atmosphere. And then condensation is when those gases are returned to the earth as rainfall or snow or hail, what have you, okay? So that is called condensation, or another name for that condensation is called precipitation, right here. So two names for the same thing, condensation and precipitation are the same thing. Here is a water cycle, very important. I think you should know that, and then study it, make sure you know the terminologies. and I will go over the terminologies. Aquifer is the water under the ground. We human are depleting it. We are using it more and more and more and more. So that is a problem. And then your PowerPoints will talk about that. Hydrologic cycle, runoffs, precipitation, when you make roads, when you make parking lots, and so on and so forth. So the rains will immediately goes to these runoffs, okay? And eventually they end up into the groundwater or groundwaters. Precipitations at least does not enter the grounds, but flows directly into streams, lakes, wetlands, and the ocean. So some water sinks or percolates into the ground, forming groundwater. Yeah, we talked about that. Okay, aquifer, I talked about it before. Aquifers are rock layers that contain water and release into the wells. So we humans put wells into them, and then we take the water out. That is not very healthy for Mother Earth, but we are doing it. So clearing vegetations, the water cycle, we human interfere, make sure these interferes, you should know a few things about them. Number one, withdrawing water from the aquifer, I talked about that. Number two, I didn't talk about it, but we are cutting rainforests. So when we are cutting rainforests, we are doing two whammies, double whammies to Mother Earth. Number one, there is not, we talked about that, the water goes back from the plants, the water goes out into the atmosphere. We're stopping that. And also, we are stopping the carbon dioxide to be recycled, and we're destroying that as well. So cutting the forest is not a good thing. Interfering with the natural process of purifying water. Yes, that's true. And adding pollutants such as sewage aquifers exceeds the possibility of recharge. So read it. These are the parts west, arid west, and southern Florida. They're tapping into the groundwater extremely based on your textbook. Okay, the carbon cycle, the next most important one. So as you know, the plants are taking the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, making photosynthesis, return oxygen that we need to inhale. So that is organisms in both terrestrial and aquatic ecosystem exchange carbon dioxide with the atmosphere. On land, plants take up carbon dioxide in the air, and through photosynthesis, the process of photosynthesis, so plants take carbon dioxide from atmosphere, make photosynthesis, and return, as I said, oxygen into the atmosphere. When organisms conduct cellular respirations, carbon is returned to the atmosphere. So right now, I am returning all of that organic molecules I ate, the food I ate, I'm returning it as a carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And the cycle goes on. The plants take that carbon dioxide and make photosynthesis, make food, and then I eat that and then return it. So the atmosphere acts as an exchange pool for the carbon cycle. And then in aquatic ecosystems, the exchange of carbon dioxide with atmosphere is indirect. So the carbon dioxide from the air combines, he's asking you to know these things. Water to produce bicarbonate. So this is bicarbonate. And then this is gives off the bicarbonate. When aquatic organisms respire, carbon dioxide gives off as bicarbonate. And when the amount of bicarbonate in water is in equilibrium with the amount of carbon dioxide in the earth, that's supposed to be in equilibrium. That's a normal condition. That's where it's supposed to be. This is the carbon cycle, guys. Okay, so diffusion of, and then into the bicarbonate, of course, and the animals and plants, they take that and they deposit it as sediments, so on and so forth. And then, of course, Reservoir hold carbon. Living and dead organisms serve as the reservoirs for carbon cycle. We talked about this a little bit. Dead organisms. And then ordinarily decomposition of plants and animals returns carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Plant and animals remains that do not decompose transform into coal, oil, and natural gases. So fossil fuels, what happens with them? Fossil fuels, we are putting extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Okay. After Industrial Revolution, what happened since we are putting so much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? Now the amount of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is more than what is supposed to be. Another reservoir for carbon dioxide, inorganic carbon that accumulates in limestones, and many marine organisms have calcium carbonate shells that remain in the ocean, sediments, and so on and so forth. Geologic forces changes these sediments into limestones. Carbon more human activities, yes. So let's talk about this, the greenhouse effect, and these are other, by burning fuels and factories, these are other gases we are putting into the atmosphere. And what happens, the atmosphere right now is acting like a shell, like a greenhouse. It's the analogy, you've seen it in news and so on and so forth. So it's a shell, then the light rays from sun comes, it goes through the atmosphere. And so the photosynthesis happen, we see each other during day and we move on, but it also brings heat waves. So two things comes from sun, the light and heat. The heat, when these gases, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane gases are in the atmosphere, it does not allow the heat to go back. When everything before Industrial Revolution, everything was in balance, so the heat went back out of the atmosphere. Now the heat is trapped on the surface of the earth because of these gases. Okay, so what happens, they call it a greenhouse effect. The glacier starts warming up, the earth starts warming up, and then that's what global warming happens. The climate changes. So the North Pole and South Poles are melting because of this. Okay, so I hope I talked about this a little bit. I'm passing through your notes, and they are saying by year 21, about 80 years from now, the Earth is going to be 2 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. And that has a lot of effect. That can put, like the southern state of Louisiana can go underwater because of that. Okay. So they're making, if the earth gets warmer this much, what happens? They're making predictions. One of the predictions, southern Louisiana, Mississippi, they're gonna go underwater. Climate change continues. Other effects may occur as oceans warm, temperature in polar regions will rise. And I think I talked about that. Droughts will reduce crop yields and kill trees and billions of dollars. Okay. Here they are, they're talking about global warming. Nitrogen cycle, yes, it is important. I don't think I'm gonna ask too many questions on your quizzes, but you should know nitrogen fixations, they're plants that they take the most of the gas in our atmosphere is nitrogen. The 70 some odd percent, 80, 70%, 78%. Okay, in our atmosphere is nitrogen. So we are not using it. No organisms are using it. The other 22%, it is the carbon and then oxygen and other things. So it is important. Nitrogen cycle is important also, but we have some legumes. It's called legumes, the trees. Here we go. These are the plants. There are not too many of them on planet Earth, which you eat beans. These are legumes, are your beans. Okay, beans family, all of that legumes family they call them. They take the nitrogen from the atmosphere and they fix it. They call it nitrogen fixation, and they make the beans, and then we eat them. So here is a nitrogen fixation, and your textbook went a little bit over and talked about these things, nitrate and nitrite, ammonia, and so on and so forth. During the process of assimilation, plant takes the ammonia and nitrate to fix in soil. Denitrification is the conversion of nitrate back into nitrogen gas, which enters into the atmosphere. So that's another term you should know, denitrification. Carried out by denitrification bacteria, and then in nitrogen cycles, denitrification with counterbalance nitrogen fixation of human if it not interfere. So these are the activities that the human interfere with nitrogen cycle and results in eutrophication, overgrowth of algae and rooted aquatic plants may lead into algae bloom, overgrowth of algae, and so on and so forth. So acid rain, it is important because of the nitrogen oxide and sulfur dioxide, which we from the factories and so on and so forth, we put into the atmosphere, and when rain comes, it dissolves these molecules, sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide. It dissolves them and it comes down to the earth, and then it can have an effect on our statues, monuments we have. It dissolves them, erodes them, and then of course it can kill the trees. So phytochemical smog, nitrogen oxides, and hydrocarbons from the burning of the fossil fuels and react with the presence of sunlight, thermal inversions, and I talked about thermal inversions. I love it. Pollutants that traps near the earth beneath a layer of warm and stagnant air. So we talked about that. So the phosphorus cycle, again, I don't have much to say about this, and that's the end of the chapter. I don't want to take up your time too much, and you guys can study it and know a few things about it. Cultures, eutrophication, and that should be the end of the chapter. All right, guys. If you have any question, please let me know.